You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers about hikers for everybody.
This is the Hammock Hangers Podcast, where we hang out and talk about everything from hammocks and hammock camping to the group hangs from around the country. Hey everyone, welcome to the Hammock Hangers Podcast, where we unwind, relax, and delve into all things hammock related. Join us as we swing into the world of hammocks, exploring tips and tricks for setting up that perfect hang, sharing stories of outdoor adventures, and discovering the latest trends in hammock camping and relaxation. Whether you're a seasoned hammocker or new to the art of hanging, this podcast is your cozy corner to kick back, escape the hustle and bustle of everyday life, and soak in the soothing atmosphere of the hammock culture. Prepare to be inspired, educated, and entertained as we embrace the hammock lifestyle together. So grab your favorite hammock, find that perfect spot to hang, and let's embark on a hammock-filled journey that will leave you feeling refreshed, rejuvenated, and ready to take on the world. This is the Hammock Hangers Podcast, where every episode is a breath of fresh air. Let's get started.
Howdy, hangers, and welcome to this week's episode. This week, it's going to kind of be a little bit of a shorter one. I say that now, but I haven't finished talking yet. Paul and I have been very busy this summer. As you guys know, I just got back from our road trip and been working on editing video. And I'm also on a special secret HangCon mission right now. And so we wanted to get this one out to you guys because we're not going to be talking about my trip this week. We're going to wait for that one for a little bit later episode because it's just me this week. But I thought I would talk about something that I kind of forced myself into during my trip, and that's just to become a better knot tire, and just to give a challenge to myself to see if I could completely eliminate all hardware from my setup and use only knots for my entire rig. That includes hammock and tarp. So let's get into it. But before we hop in, I just kind of want to talk about some of the things that are coming around in the hammock community. We have a couple hangs that are in the works in the very near future. We have Midha doing their annual summer hang in Pennsylvania, as well as our friends down in Palmetto State. They're going to be doing their swamp butt hang a little bit later this month as well. I did see the other day where Maha has officially released their dates for their fall hang. They will be back at Caledonia State Park in Pennsylvania. So make sure that if you're interested in going to some of those hangs, go and check them out on Facebook. There's also some information on hammock forums as well. They're really great hangs, and if you've never been to a hang before, I strongly encourage you to go to one that is close to you, or maybe make a big push to travel a little bit. They really are kind of the best things about the hammock community. Great places to meet people, great places to see and check out gear. It's really a great experience, so I encourage you to do that. So let's get into our episode today. So why did I want to do this? Now, I just know me, and there's a lot of things that go into making a hammock experience a really good thing or a really bad thing. And I just kind of want to make myself prepared for the best, and also prepare myself for the worst. So as you guys know, I have a lot of gear, And sometimes I'm bouncing components back and forth. As you guys may remember, when I did my hidden pond trip, I didn't have guy lines for my tarp, and it happens. Every time I try to remedy that, it still happens every once in a while. I forget this or I forget that. I've really tried to push to make sure that all of my tarps that I have, all of my hammocks that I have a specific suspension or guy lines or ridge lines dedicated specifically to that piece of gear. But things happen. I get lazy, so I'll grab something from this tarp and rob Peter to pay Paul, and I end up kicking myself in the butt maybe later on down the trip. But so far, it's been all right. I've been able to kind of remedy that situation. But just knowing me, I forget things. Second along that, I lose things. And hardware can be lost. It can slip off. It can just almost seemingly vanish sometimes. And what do you do in kind of that situation? Now, a lot of the components that I'm looking to replace are metal components. And when you're packing away metal components, even you can be as careful as you possibly can, but those metal components can cause wear on your gear, especially if you're using metal components on stuff like silk poly or Dyneema fabrics for a tarp. That just rubbing and it's going to cause wear. And if you're really compressing things down, Lord forbid you get a piece of metal that puts a hole in your tarp, or maybe accidentally a hook gets caught on something and causes a rip, either in a hammock or a quilt. That would just not be a good day. So I'm trying to see if I can eliminate that possibility as well. Now, I'm not a particular gram weenie, but just as a sake of argument, hardware is going to be more heavy than just using the line that you're already carrying that's attached to your hammock or to your tarp, either in the form of a ridge line or a guy line. So eliminating the hardware is also going to eliminate weight as well. Now, one of the big things is hardware, and I have a ton of it, and it's really, really nice. But if you're outfitting a tarp and a hammock with all the little doodads, it can get really, really expensive over time, especially if you're doing multiple setups. If you're putting a little piece of hardware, sometimes that little piece of hardware can cost up to $9 a piece. And even if you're doing like $5 a piece, if you've got 4 tie outs on your tarp, you're looking at $20 just in hardware. So over time, that can get expensive. But if you're already using the lines that you've already paid for that's attached to your tarp, you're not incurring that extra cost as well. So eliminating the hardware can help eliminate some of the expense as well. And another reason, you never know when you're going to need some of these knots. You never know when, a piece breaks, or you lose a piece, or you just have to make adjustments that the hardware doesn't allow you to make. Having that information in your back pocket is really invaluable, to know that something could go wrong, but you have a plan for what to do if that does. Even if you don't use it all the time, you still have that in your toolbox for you to use. Now, one of the things that kind of gets me about hardware, especially some of the hooks, and I'm mainly speaking of like guy lines or a tarp ridge line, is those pieces of hardware when you're bundling up your lines. Depending on how you do it, they can easily get tangled up in your lines. And, the hook, well, it hooks onto line, and it can make it a real pain to untangle If you're using a continuous ridge line, where you have a little bit more line than if you did a split ridge line, each time that you loop around, it gets caught and it can kind of get really, really annoying. I've tried to mitigate that as much as I can, but it still happens. Not to say that just using lines themselves, if you don't bundle them correctly, will also tangle up, but it just adds another factor. So that's kind of the reason that I wanted to just kind of force myself into doing this. Now, when we talk about knots, there's a lot of people that get kind of this anxiety about like, oh, well, I'm going to use hardware because knots are too hard. I don't do knots. And I want to kind of step into kind of a teacher mode here. I kind of question myself, like, why is that? Like, why are knots such a taboo, or such a something that is like, oh, well, I'm not good at? And as you guys know, I'm a teacher, and a lot of people say, and we talk about with the podcast as well, words are hard. A lot of people think that about math, which is something that I absolutely love, but it's a lot, oh, well, I don't do math, or math is hard, and it's socially acceptable more so than saying, oh, I don't like to read, or I can't read, or it's reading is hard. A lot of people find a little bit more that it's being a little taboo. Well, knots in the camping world seem to be something that it's completely okay to say, oh, I don't know how to do that, because maybe you have some anxiety about tying knots, and kind of, where does that come from? And I really started, thinking, like, why would people be so scared of knots? And I have no science behind this, but this is kind of what I've kind of been thinking. What's everyone's introduction to knot? Like, if you think about the knot that you was your very first knot that you knew how to tie, it's your shoes. That's something that, socially, that's what we do. That's the first knot that we learn how to tie. And if you really look at it, the knot that we use to tie our shoes is not a super easy knot to tie when you're first learning. There's different parts. You're connecting two pieces of rope, so you have two working ends. There are loops that you've got to tie. You've got to pull this loop through, but don't pull all the way. And if you don't do it tight enough, it falls apart. And if you mess it up, it can have consequences. It's not that simple. And if you don't know how to tie it correctly, there's kind of this negative stigma. It's like, oh, well, tie your shoes. I mean, I do it as a teacher all the time. Like, if I have, third and fourth graders, like, you don't know how to tie your shoes. Well, I'm not tying your shoes, because Lord knows where those shoelaces have been. Probably been in your mouth. Like, I'm not helping you tie this. So it adds kind of that anxiety around knots, because of the very first knot that we kind of teach ourselves or have to use. And if we don't do it correctly, our shoelaces can come untied. And so we have to do it again and again and again. Or, Lord forbid, it causes some sort of injury. I tell my students at school all the time, I've worked way too hard on your brain to clean it up off the floor because you tripped over your shoelaces. Go ahead, tie your shoe, or at least tuck them in, because we got to get to lunch. So that's kind of something that is always in the back of our head. And as I mentioned before, if you don't do it correctly, it can turn into this big knot. And if you kind of yank down on it, it can make it almost impossible to untie. And as the saying goes, if you don't know how to tie a knot, you tie a lot. And so I have seen some crazy knot balls that I just said, I'm not going to attempt to do this, so I'm just going to cut it out. I'm just going to cut the shoelaces because I cannot get these knots undone. And if you do that for like your straps, well, you're kind of out of luck when it comes to your gear. And, you've paid good money for that, so you really don't want to do that. Which, if it doesn't tie correctly, you get frustrated. There's the social anxiety as well. So this is kind of my thoughts of kind of the origins of why people are not really gung-ho about saying, oh, I'll use knots. Not only for that, when you come into the hammock world, you start to begin to learn knots, one way or the other, and then you realize, oh, well, I don't want to do that. Oh, there's hardware that allows me to take those knots away. There's some of the great pieces of hardware. And so you just assume, oh, these knots, that they're going to be hard, so I want to avoid using the knots. When really, a lot of the knots that we use in hammocking are either really, really easy to use, or you just tie them once and they're kind of set. It's not something that you're having to tie all the time. Now, with your suspension, it's kind of a little bit more in the game, because if you don't tie, let's say a J-bend or a Beckett hitch are two popular knots that people use as hammock suspension, this knot is holding your weight. So if you don't tie that knot, you avoid the risk of your suspension failing. And no one really wants that, whether it be a slow, painful descent to the ground, or a very short fall with a very sudden stop. No one really wants that. Either our pride doesn't want it, or your butt doesn't want it either, because it's more than likely, especially the latter, it's kind of going to hurt. And you always worry about, oh, well, what if I can't untie the knot? Like, am I stuck? Am I ruining those straps? Or what am I going to do? And I would say also with knots, when you get into some of the colder temperatures, like some of our northern friends in Minnesota doing their frozen butt hang, I can't really imagine using a lot of knots at negative 40 degrees. Just even the ones that are slippery, that you can untie easily, my fingers hurt just thinking about tying some of those knots at those temperatures. Now, your ridgeline and your guy out lines, that bar for failure is slightly less. So if you have a failure, you could get wet, or they knot up, and again you have to untie, or if you can't, you might end up having to cut it out. And those lines are usually a lot smaller diameter, so those knots can get really, really, really small and really, really, really tight really easily. Also, with the guy lines, ridge lines, and especially with the and steel that we use for our suspension, those lines are Dyneema, and they're really, really slippery as well, and that adds an aspect of failure if you don't do them correctly. And also, if you're trying to tension something down, those lines like slip really, really easily, so it's hard for a knot to really, really stay tight as much as you would want it before you finish the knot. So there's that possibility as well. So we've talked about all the negative things that can be happening with knots, but here's some of the positives. So I challenge myself to do a all knot setup. No hardware, only lines. No plastic hardware, no metal hardware, only the lines that I'm using. So why am I doing this? Well, I'm looking at this as a way to better myself, as to grow as an outdoorsman, and to just make myself better at a particular skill, and to give myself a set of skills and to improve those skills. So for one, I do this while I'm teaching as well. I learn how to do things in order for my personal benefit, but also in order to help others. I run classes at hangs that we go to, and I've done classes with Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts as well. And also, I got kids as well, and I really like passing that information off to my kids as well. And it's just to also be prepared. I was an Eagle Scout, and that's kind of always been kind of a mantra: is be prepared for what may happen. Hope for the best, expect the very worst, and just to have that in your back pocket, even if you may never use it, and you hope that you never have to. In the odd possibility that something like that does happen, you have a plan. It's not the end of the line. It's not a disaster. It's always great to have that just in case your line breaks. Well, how am I going to connect two pieces of rope? How am I going to tie my hammock to the tree when my suspension failed? Or what am I going to do if my continuous loop wears out? And how am I going to still attach my hammock to the tree? And so my backpacking trip or my camping trip for that weekend is not completely ruined, and you're not having to do the drive of shame back home because, you had your entire camping trip ruined because of one little incident. So I'm trying to limit myself to as little knots as I possibly can, and a lot of just to not have to learn a lot of extra things, or not having to use a lot of extra things, because we do have a lot of anxiety towards knots, and someone that is new to using knots is not going to say, "Oh, I want to improve your hammock experience using knots, but I want you to learn these 18 knots." Whew, that sounds kind of just anxiety filled already. And I want a lot of these knots to be quick tie and quick release, or a kind of knot that I can use as a set it and forget it. Now, some of these pieces of gear that I've used to kind of make this happen, a lot of them you can buy from some of our cottage vendors. I've used Zing It as for a lot of these applications, especially for the tarp and the ridge lines and the guy out lines. I have made some of the Zing It soft shackles, which are really, really good. I've made some Zing It continuous loops. And this is not necessarily a knot, although it's a skill that I think a lot of people should have. If you do hammocking, I would strongly suggest you learning how to splice. It's really, really easy, especially if you're splicing aim still. Zing It is a little bit more tedious, but it's really a great skill to have in your back pocket as well. So continuous loops, soft shackles, and I've also made some Zing It universal loops or Evo loops. Either one will work. So the hammock suspension, I'm using just Dyneema webbing. This works really, really well because, for one, you shouldn't use buckles with strictly Dyneema webbing, because the buckles work on friction, and the pushing and grabbing onto the webbing works really, really well with poly blend or polyester straps, but Dyneema, it's just so slippery. It's really not optimal to use. So if you're using Dyneema straps, really the Beckett hitch is the way to go. There's also some other knots that you can use with Dyneema webbing, but the nice go-to is the Beckett hitch. Now, what I love about the Beckett hitch it really is a quick tie knot. You can tie a Beckett hitch almost with one hand in about a second and a half. It is a really, really easy knot to tie. And it's also really, really easy to untie if you have the right end on your hammock. If you were just using a Beckett hitch to tie directly to a continuous loop, it is really, really, really hard to untie in the morning after you've put weight in that hammock all night, because of the way that it scrunches into that one end of the continuous loop and you don't have anything to pull on that end out. It makes it really, really difficult. So if you were using the Beckett hitch to replace any suspension hardware, I would suggest using getting rid of your continuous loops and replacing them with either universal loops, or I use the all-in-whoopee suspension that I created, or they're also they make continuous loops with an extra loop spliced on to the end of it. I know Emery from Autumn Outdoor Gear, she makes them, and there's Jeff Myers, he also makes them, and there's a few other vendors, and there's plenty of tutorials on YouTube as well that you can go to use to make your own as well, which is something that I strongly encourage you to do. It'll save you money, and it also, I'm all about learning new things and bettering ourselves as well. So that's really all the Beckett hitch is, and this is not too much of a departure from what I use normally. I really like the birch buckles from Autumn Outdoor Gear, or Dutchware's beetle buckle system. I use that a lot, but for my hammocks that I take on day trips and things like that, I already just have a 12-foot, I think it's about 12-foot Dyneema tree huggers or tree straps that I can just cinch and done. And as I said before, the Beckett hitch works with not only Dyneema, but it also works for polyester and polyblend webbing as well. You can either even do a Beckett hitch using the spider webbing daisy chains as well. It's so thin that you can just do it with that instead of using the daisy chain as a daisy chain, and you can kind of eliminate the use of a carabiner. So you're eliminating that piece of hardware and that weight and that bulk as well. So really versatile knot, really easy to tie and untie. So I encourage you to look at that and try to add that to your arsenal in some capacity. Now, your ridgeline, there's a few other things that we're going to do, but most of these are set it and forget it. And I actually tried two different setups when it came to my ridgeline. Now, I use a continuous ridgeline. I don't mind carrying the extra line that I need to have one piece. It just works for me, but you can use this as a split ridgeline as well. So let's talk about the continuous ridgeline option first. So what I did first, you would have to connect your ridgeline to the tree. And normally I use a Dutch hook that I have spliced on to the end that I just loop around and it hooks over the line. Well, my challenge, I wanted to get rid of the hardware. So what do? I actually have spliced, kind of tweaked a little bit Amaris from Autumn Outdoor Gear, and also Jeff Myers from Myers Tech. They did a ridgeline that had a Evo loop kind of spliced on to the end and kind of integrated in. So you would just loop it around the tree, and then loop it over itself, and the ball knot or the knot at the end, which I want to say it's a diamond knot at the end, that would kind of go back into itself, and it works. The more you pull on it, the tighter that squeeze around that knot is, so it's not going to come undone. And so that knot kind of replaces the Dutch hook at the end. And so that ties it to the tree. Now, what are you going to do to pull tension and loop it around the other tree so you can start connecting your tarp? For this one, I used a knot called the trucker's hitch. Again, another really, really easy knot that maybe looks intimidating at first, but it's really not hard at all to learn. And after doing it a few times, it's really simple to add to your arsenal. And that's the case with a lot of these knots. It's something that it's really easy to just practice at home. And after you've done it, about 12 times, it really just kind of becomes second nature. And coming from education, you need to do something about 30 times, most people, to kind of it ingrained. And so this is something that you could easily take care of over a couple days or even a trip if you're just practicing before you add it into your setup full time. Now, going back to the trucker's hitch with the Dyneema line like Zingit. This is probably like the least favorite of my knots that I have for this because, like I said, that Dyneema line is really, really slippery. So being able to pull tension and hold tension is kind of difficult, but it can be done. Now, I like my ridge lines like crazy tight. So maybe some of the rest don't need them necessarily as tight. I probably don't either, but it's just kind of a personal preference. So when you pinch it before you tie the slippery hitch to kind of lock it down, it can slip a little bit. So just take that in mind. It's not the end of the world, but it's just a factor. Now, connecting my tarp to the actual continuous loop, or to continuous ridge line, what I did, I use Prusik loops, but I Prusik them as a soft shackle or as a Evo loop. Now, the thing about a soft shackle is it's really nice because it essentially works the same way as a carabiner. You would just loop it around your ridge line, and it's kind of there. You don't have to tie that Prusik over and over and over. Like once you tie it once, it's set. It's there. And the another thing about the Prusik, when I first started using the Prusik, I really wanted to bomb-proof my setup, so I didn't want something to fail. So I Prusiked on, but I did like 7 loops around before I actually tightened it down. And it was this long Prusik knot. I was like, oh, this is not going anywhere. But that became a problem because it was great when I wanted to lock it down. However, if I had to adjust it, it wasn't going to move. So when you're tying it, you only need 3 to 4 loops around the line that you're using to tighten it down. You don't need a lot because the more loops, the harder it's going to bite down on that line, and it's going to be harder to move. So 3 to 4 times and you're golden. That's really all you need. And so that way you can use that to kind of adjust where you want on your ridgeline and to connect the tarp to those. If you're using a soft shackle, you can just put it right on the rings, or I actually just did continuous loops, Prusik to the line, and a Evo looped lark's headed to the loop, and I was able to just kind of connect them the same way for that as well. I understand that I'm saying a lot of these things and it's kind of hard to maybe visualize. So maybe this is a possibility for a video as well, which that might be a little bit down the road. I also offer this as a class at HangCon, as well as some of the other hangs that I go to as well. So if you go to a hang and you see me there, if I'm running a class, feel free to join. If not, if you've got questions, feel free to come over and ask. I love helping people out. So that's how I would connect my tarp to the ridgeline, and I can adjust and set up just fine. Now, as far as the guy lines out, I really like my tack toggles, and that's really the go-to. But as I said, I wanted to eliminate the hardware, even the plastic hardware that is still relatively cheap to use. But for this, I used something called a taut line hitch. And this is another really, really great knot that you can use, that you kind of tie it once, and you can tie it as a knot, or you can tie it as a slippery knot that you can untie really, really easily. But it's something that you tie it and you don't have to untie it. You can kind of just use it to adjust and to tighten your lines. It bites down and it's stuck, or you can loosen it and it's fine. You don't have to completely untie it. It's an adjustable knot, not something that you have to break down every really time. So, and this is kind of the same thing as a prusik. You only need 3 or 4 loops around before you loop back to the top to kind of lock it down, because you want that knot to easily, when you want to move easily, when you want to adjust it, but still bite down and secure when you don't. So I was able to do this for the entire month that we were out. And so here's some things that I learned. One, I kind of really, really liked it, because when I was packing away, I didn't have to worry about being super careful with, a piece of hardware poking something that it shouldn't be poking. And I could just really just cram stuff in. I'm sure there was a weight factor that I saved, but I don't really weigh my gear. So the bulk factor was nice as well, that I didn't have to worry about just extra bulk as far as the hardware. It was already there, and it's less pieces that I have to worry about, less pieces that I have to worry about losing, or less pieces that I have to worry about breaking or forgetting or it falling off. So it was really nice. But how did it work? It worked surprisingly well. There was a few times where things kind of slipped from raining, but I didn't have a failure. Just sometimes my tarp was maybe not as taut as I would like it, but it was easy to go out and just tighten this knot a little bit, adjust it to be a little bit tighter. As I said when I was talking about the knots, I didn't have to untie anything. It was just a simple adjustment. Would I incorporate this a lot as full time? I think so. As far as the hammock suspension using the Beckett hitch, I love it. That's something that I'm comfortable doing. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be using that as well. As far as the guy lines out and using a taut line hitch, I think overall, I think I'm really, really set on my tack toggles, and that's something that I would probably not replace, but it was a lot easier than tying a slippery knot directly to a stake. It was a lot easier to just loosen that taut line hitch and just loop it over, and it's done. I didn't have to wrap it around and then tie a knot and then have a lot of extra dangling around causing tripping hazards. It's all just kind of self-contained. So that was really, really nice. But the tack toggles and looping those around are also really, really easy. So the guy lines, it's kind of a wash for me. I really liked using the taut line hitch, but it wasn't kind of a game changer that I would say, I want to easily just get rid of the hardware and go to the knots. As far as the ridgeline goes, man, I really liked the knot on the end, eliminating that Dutch hook. That was really, really nice. The good thing about that was it was a lot easier to untangle because you just bloop, the stopper knot through itself and you were done. Sometimes the hook, it really holds on, and you have to have really, really tiny hands, and it can be a little bit of a pain to undo that hook. So the knot on the end was really, really easy and really, really simple, and it didn't hurt my hands, especially when it got really, really cold. So that was something that I'll probably be moving toward a more permanent replacement for my ridge lines. As far as the other line, nah, I'm stuck with my wasp. The taut line hitch, or not the taut line hitch, but the trucker's hitch to tighten that ridge line down. It definitely worked, but I really like either using a tack toggle or a Dutch wasp or a stinger. That piece of hardware is really something that I think I'll stick with. It's really nice to have the trucker's hitch and the ability to use that, but as a whole, I don't think that that's something that's going to be replaced. Now, as far as connecting the tarp to the ridgeline using the Pheonix, I'm still a little bit out on that. I really like the Namaclaws that I have as my go-to setup, but man, those they can get tangled up really, really easy. And now that I haven't put like 8 loops on those Pheonix, I can get them moving pretty freely. So I'm going to explore those a little bit more, play around with them. I really, really like that setup. And I don't know. I think that I might be leaning that way as well, just because it's just ease of use, and it's a lot cheaper than buying the little metal pieces. Um, so yeah. So I've said a lot of things like a knot and a hitch, and there's also another type of knot called a bend. So what's the difference between those? And just doing a little bit of research for this episode, I kind of learned something. So a knot is kind of a blanket term that we use just for all things. Like, for example, we might say, "Oh, I've got a Yeti cooler." Well, a Yeti cooler seems to be a lot of things nowadays, except maybe not necessarily made by Yeti. So it's just kind of an umbrella term that we use. But a knot technically does not need something else to hold its integrity. So if you're tying a just a knot around itself, it's not really holding anything together. Now, a hitch is a little bit different. A hitch must be tied around something, whether it be another stationary object or another piece of rope. But a bend is a particular knot that is used to tie 2 pieces together. So, like, for example, if I need to tie 2 pieces of cordage together, kind of the go-to knot that I'll use is a square knot. It's a great knot, and probably one of the few knots that I got when I learned from Boy Scouts. That was a really interesting thing that I've experienced over my hammock journey. As an Eagle Scout, I'm sure that I was exposed to upteen bajillion knots over my time in scouting. I didn't really remember how to tie really any of them, with the exception of the square knot. But once I've gotten into hammocking and forcing myself to use a little bit more of these knots, I have really broadened my horizon on the number of knots and the repertoire of knots that I can use. Not as much as some folks, but definitely a lot more in my range of use that I can use. So that's going to do it for this week. We got a lot of things going on that I need to get to, but I really hope that you've enjoyed this episode. And hopefully I've inspired you to maybe just try some extra knots on your own. It's something that's really easy to do, either whether you do it on your own gear or get a little bit thicker rope and just try the knots in theory versus actually in practice. You might find that it's something that you really enjoy doing. You can find tutorials on how to tie these knots on YouTube. And there's also apps as well that you can download that have diagrams and videos on how to tie variations of knots as well. And also as an encouragement to go out to some of these hangs, I know at HangCon as well as Fall Sprawl, and I'm pretty sure maybe even at Maha as well, there are usually classes that entail some sort of knot tying skills. So you can talk to people that are more comfortable with using them than you are, and maybe that might inspire you to learn a new skill for your hammock lifestyle. So that'll do it for this week. If you really like what you're hearing, I encourage you to go out to our social media platforms. Give us a like on YouTube and a subscribe. That really helps us broaden out our podcast to the greater world, as well as wherever you listen to your podcast. Give us a review, a 5-star review. That really helps broaden and disseminate our podcast and as suggestions to other people, so more people can find us as well. And also just talk to people. I love hearing people that said, oh, I showed my friend your podcast and now they're listeners too. It's a great way to get more people informed about hammocking and more people into the hobby as well. And I love seeing this community grow. You can also catch us on Facebook and Instagram as well. Just look for the Hammock Hangers podcast. Well, howdy hangers, welcome. And thanks for staying out with us this week. And until next week or next time, happy hanging, everybody.
As we gently sway out of another Hammock Field episode, we want to thank you, our wonderful listeners, for hanging out with us on the Hammock Hangers podcast. We hope that you have found relaxation, inspiration, and a renewed sense of connection to nature through our discussions. Remember to keep that hammock spirit alive in your daily life, whether it's by taking a few moments to unwind in your own backyard oasis or by planning your next hammock adventure in the great outdoors. Embracing the tranquility, embracing the simplicity, and never forget the joy that comes from simply hanging around. Before we part ways, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay up to date with all things hammock related. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Just search for the Hammock Hangers Podcast. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to hang with you again on our next episode. Until then, stay relaxed, stay adventurous, and keep on hanging those hammocks high. From all of us here at the Hammock Hangers Podcast, we wish you peaceful hangs and endless relaxation. Thank you for tuning in. Happy hanging, everyone.